Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Today is the day 3 for Code Palo USA 2021 conference started on August 18th. You are in the session for SAML and Azure AD, Identity and Access Management System. We are presenting myself, Prabhat, and my partner in crime, Mohammed Niaz. Today, 8:20, 8 a.m. Pacific. Okay. So myself, Prabhat Nigam, I'm a 3 times Microsoft MVP, blogger, speaker, author, father, and husband. I have over 20 years of IT experience, worked with almost all IT giants, IBM, Microsoft, Wipro, TCS, you name it, Dell, HP. I'm a global CTO for Golden 5 Consulting. We are a US-based gold partner and direct CSP. Here's my ID, here's my website. I'm also CEO for LAEXUG Foundation, which is a nonprofit to run the user groups in Los Angeles. And now we're going live also, so it runs full day, the groups as well. On the right hand side, you can find my email ID, LinkedIn ID, and the Twitter as well. I'm a universal donor. I share my birthday with Microsoft. We were born on the same day, 4/4. And I'm Microsoft certified professional since 1998 and keeping that trend going. Next slide. Yes.
Is the change reflecting there? Now you can see my slides.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhat. I'm Mohammed Niaz. You're hearing me from Dubai. I'm a Microsoft MVP and 2 times VMware vExpert instructor and author. Over 10 years in IT industry, presently I'm fully engaged in Veridos, one of the leading identity solution provider, as a technical expert, and then an author and a trainer at IT Pro Guide. And I run a YouTube channel, and I hope this is how I known in Microsoft community. I think that's enough for now. Continue, Prabhat, please.
Yeah, we are very sad with the COVID situation worldwide. Here in America or worldwide, you have to think about these on the right side screens. When if you are fully vaccinated and you are visiting fully vaccinated person, then only you are fully secure and safe. If not, then you still have to follow the safety measures. Yes, and click things will start coming. So we're definitely sorry for your losses. Delta variant is going and it's very popular right now. So keep on following the guidelines wherever you are. In USA, we have the third shot coming up for some who really need that. My father had COVID and he's still recovering from his health. He's not fully recovered. It was 2 months back. He was, yes, click on this point. Everyone stay safe, stay away, keep social distancing, continue to say namaste, we wear the mask. Hopefully, we'll beat COVID. Let's move on to the next slide. This was the number yesterday. How many people were impacted with this global pandemic? We just keep growing. We have to work hard to go other way. It's going up, we have to go down. That's our mission. Let's focus on that. Agenda for today, introduction to single sign-on. If you know already, great. But let's think about it again. Then what is Azure AD? What is SAML 2? How does it work? And in the end, we'll share some demo as well. Being said that, I'm handing over the stage to Niaz to take it from here. Go ahead, Niaz.
All right, Prabhat, thank you. So I will start from this single sign-on. So the SAML Azure AD is all about securing the identity of user and giving access to the application. So the first thing we need to know is about single sign-on. So when we started talking about single sign-on, one of the question always comes to me is, so what is the right setup to have a single sign-on when you start talking about SAML? So implementing SAML is a solution for everything in single sign-on. So this kind of questions frequently come to us when we talk about single sign-on. So all this depends upon what you have in your environment. What is the current setup you have in your organization? So let's take some examples or some scenarios and see how the single sign-on works. So think about this setup, an organization having an active directory and on-premises solutions like Exchange Server, File Server, SharePoint, SQL Server. So in this case, all the users and the applications are going to use Active Directory as their identity server, and they get authenticated and accessing the application. So this scenario we can call as single sign-on without much additional software. The organization having a setup like this already fulfilled their single sign-on requirements. Coming to the next scenario, we have applications like Exchange Online, Yammer, OneDrive, Teams. As you know, these applications are from Office 365 portfolio, and all these need Azure AD for authentication. So in this case, user is going to get authenticated from Azure AD and get access to this application. Here also all the applications of this organization is getting authenticated from Azure AD, so it doesn't need any other third party application or any other standards to use to authenticate the application. Now let's discuss another scenario where an organization having hybrid setup, which means some application runs in the on-premises with Active Directory authenticated, and some application runs in cloud as a software as a service in cloud where Azure AD is authenticated. So in this case, the organization have to maintain users in Active Directory and also in Azure AD. So think about managing an organization identity solution like having two username and two password for one user in two directory and managing. This is going to be a very big headache in enterprise setup. So there it comes, the Microsoft come with a solution that is Azure AD synchronization, where the users in Active Directory get synchronized with the Azure AD so that there is no more duplicate username and password. The same user sit in the Azure AD, and the user can get authenticated from Azure AD for the cloud applications. At the same time, the users can get authenticated from on-premises Active Directory for the on-premises application. Now, coming to another scenario where an organization started thinking of a custom application or a third-party application that is out of the Microsoft portfolio. It cannot be authenticated with the Active Directory authentication or Azure AD because this is a third-party application. Now, think about a custom application that you develop for your organization. In this case, this is something out of Microsoft portfolio, so you need a solution to authenticate this application. The first solution is to authenticate locally, but that is out of the single sign-on concept. So there it comes the chance, opportunity of SAML, OAuth, and OpenID Connect. So what is a SAML? So SAML is an open standard that allows identity providers like Azure AD to pass authorization to the service providers. And SAML use XML, that is extensible markup language for communication between the identity providers and service providers. So in simple terms, we can say that it's a link. It's a link between the authentication of users from an identity provider to use the service. So if you have a third-party application and which is out of the Microsoft portfolio, still you can manage the authentication of those applications from Azure AD using standard protocols like SAML, as it is open standard, and if both parties support the application and your identity provider support, means they are open to use it. So to understand SAML, let's start with who are the participants or who are the providers in SAML. So you have a service provider and an identity provider. So the applications like Salesforce, CRM, these applications, if you are using in your organization, and these are called as service providers because they are giving a service to your organization. And Azure AD is the identity provider because the application like CRM solution, Salesforce, these are going to be authenticated from an identity provider like Azure AD. So we call Azure AD as identity provider in this, and this Salesforce or CRM applications as a service provider. So a service provider need to be authenticated from identity provider. So organizations always use a common identity. That is what essentially mentioned, a identity provider, a common identity. It can be an Active Directory or Azure AD for authentication of the user. So this identity provider always manage the authentication centrally so that it is easy to manage the users from this point instead of having a local database for all the users in all the service provider application. So in order to understand how SAML works, let us go through an example. So here I'm going to take Dropbox as a service provider, then Azure AD as a identity provider. So Dropbox have a choice like you can sign up a user and you can use the local authentication of Dropbox. The other choice is you can also integrate with Azure AD using SAML so that the users get authenticated from Azure AD. So if you choose Dropbox to authenticate from Azure AD, what will happen when user try to log into Dropbox? Immediately the Dropbox will identify that, okay, this user is from Azure AD, so I'm not the one going to authenticate. I will pass this authentication to Azure AD. Then the Azure AD login page will pop up and the users sign in. And once the user get authenticated and authorized, this information passing to the Dropbox. Dropbox will verify the received information and give access to the application. So let's see how it works. So I'm going to show you a demo on how what is the user experience on this. So this is a Dropbox business login page, and I'm going to log in with one of the user I already enrolled. Copy the email address. You see, once I complete the username, it immediately identify that this user is single sign on enabled actually. So it is not asking me to enter the local password because it automatically know that this user is already single sign on enabled. So I can continue, and that will take me to the Microsoft login page. So I can verify the user from here. And you can see that I logged into the Dropbox. So this is how the single sign-on is going to work. I started with the Dropbox application, then it take me to Azure AD login page. I completed my login and I get back to my Dropbox. So let's move back to the slides. So now let us have a quick look on what the transactions between this Azure AD and Dropbox. So let's begin from the point number one. When user try to access the application, as you see that the service provider hold a database which contain the information about this user identity is provided by Azure AD. So application find out that this is provided by Azure AD and it generates a request that is known as SAML authentication request and redirect the user browser to Azure AD. Then the user browser redirected automatically to the Azure AD login page. So where the user enter the username and password, then Azure AD verify this user. Once the verification complete, Azure AD just create a SAML response, and that's sent to the application via user browser. So once the Dropbox or the service provider receive the SAML response, it it check the SAML response, make sure that everything is correct, then it give access to the application. So if you look at this flow, you can see that there is no direct communication between Azure AD and the application service provider. Everything is going through with the user browser. So there is no direct communication. All the requests and also the responses are passed through the user browser. So we found two things. One is authentication request and also second one is response. So let's see what are inside the authentication request. So if you look at this authentication request, you can see that the version is mentioned here, SAML 2.0. Then also it is mentioned assertion consumer service URL. So this is the URL where the identity provider gonna send once the authentication complete, it send the information to this URL. And also you can see the issuer name, that is Dropbox. So this is how, because Azure AD contains multiple service providers. So in order to identify which service provider is giving this request, it is identified by the issuer name. And also in the name ID policy, you can see that this authentication request generated from the Dropbox is requesting an email address. So which means that the email address is what the identity provider need to send back, because that is how the application mapped the user to their application. Now look at the response sent by Azure AD. Here you can see we have a status. So once the SAML authentication verified by the Azure AD, the status is here. Then as I told that in the response they included the email address, so that this is how the service provider can confirm that this user have access with these two things. Then also the recipient is mentioned. So now you see the authentication request and also the SAML response. So in order to work SAML between a service provider and an identity provider, the first step is to configure a trust relationship between the service provider and identity provider. And the trust relationship is completed by exchanging the metadata, that is an XML file. So let's understand why a trust bit is required, why a metadata exchange is required. So now I have a picture with IDP in the left side and service provider in the right side. So here username that's recorded in the IDP is Adam, and his email address is adam@itproguide.com, first name, last name, and password. The service provider also contain this information, but the username is different. First name and last name is different. The common thing here is email address. So if you look at the email address is same, but the username is Adams, and the service provider contain a reference that the Azure AD is the identity provider. So when a user try to sign into the service provider, as we saw, a authentication request gonna send to the identity provider, then also a SAML assertion, that is a response gonna send to the service provider. So if the identity provider sent username, that is Adam, as the user identifier that the service provider have to use to map to the application, then what will happen? It is Adam, but the username here is Adams. In this case, there is a mismatch, right? So if the identity provider send a user identifier that is not available in the service provider, then it's an issue because the application cannot map the service. So there is a requirement of an understanding between the identity provider and a service provider before they begin this process. So that is one of the importance of exchange a metadata or a trust between the IDP and service provider. The second point is about the integrity. So the message sent by the identity provider to the service provider and also the service provider to the identity provider, this is sent over the user browser, over the internet. So the integrity of this message need to be assured. So a SAML assertion and SAML authentication request must be signed using a certificate. So these are the two major blocks that we need to assure in the trust between the service provider and IDP, identity provider. So you can see that here, once you have a trust between the identity provider and a service provider, in the SAML configuration itself, the service provider can say that I want email address as a user identifier, and the SAML configuration from the identity provider can confirm that I will be sharing you the email address, so that this is how you can map. And also there will be certificates shared, so that the signed assertion from the IDP to service provider, and also the authentication request from the service provider to the IDP, can be verified using the certificate that exchanged between both the parties. So let's have a quick look to the metadata. So the main blocks in the metadata. So you can see the unspecified email address persistent. These are some of the name ID format that can be requested by IDP to by service provider to the identity provider. So unspecified means there is no special requirement from the service provider. So in this case, identity provider will use its own format, but the common format is email address, because email address is what unique. The first name and last name people may keep changing when they fill up the forms. So it's always better to go with the email address, and that is the default. Then persistence means it will be username, then entity ID. Entity ID is can be a name or a URL, and this is how the identity provider and the service provider identify who is sending this message. And then a document signer certificate. So the IDP will sign this the SAML assertion with its private key. Then the service provider gonna uh, verify this SAML assertion to assure that this messages are coming from the right identity provider. Then binding is what we saw already. When the user gonna try to sign into the service provider, it redirect. That is what the first binding, redirect to the identity provider. And once the authentication complete, then this gonna post to the service provider. So these are the two bindings also. So these are the minimum informations that included in the metadata of a service provider or the identity provider. So now let's move to the demo part. So I have logged into the Azure portal, and you can go for the enterprise application. And from the enterprise application, you can add a new application here. So you have different options. If you are adding an application that is not in the Azure AD gallery, then you can add it. You can click on this create your own application, or you can add a search from the gallery app and you can find out. So you can see Dropbox is already available in the Azure AD gallery. The advantage of using a gallery application is there are many configurations already Microsoft completed. So you only need to do the final touch, but creating your own application, require more input from your side. So I already added Dropbox to the application list. So let's click on the Dropbox. Then you can see you have a very good getting started guide from Microsoft. You can see assign users and groups, set up single sign-on, provision users, conditional access, self-service. So the first step in this, once you have a Dropbox subscription, you can add your users here, whoever you want to provide the application service. I know Dropbox is not going to be a fancy one here because we have OneDrive from Microsoft. But if you're using any other application like SAP or Salesforce or anything, and you want to add users, you can add it from here. You don't need to go and add from the Salesforce console. You can add simply from here, and you can also provision the access automatically. So now I add one user here. Now let's go back to the main window and see single sign-on setup. So these are the SAML configuration requirement. So let's log into the Dropbox admin console also, so that we can complete the configuration review easily. So I have logged into the Dropbox business account, then going to the admin console, and then from there to the settings. Then from here, I have an option single sign-on, and that is giving me some minimal controls. So let's put this side by side so that it will be easy to view. So now we can see that the basic SAML configuration requirement. In this, you can, if you click on the edit button, you will see you need to provide entity ID, then assertion consumer service URL, sign on URL. These are the minimum information that you need to provide. So the entity ID is Dropbox. This is by default available here. You just need to select it. That's it. Then replay URL also you can find from the Microsoft guides, or you can use a Dropbox step-by-step guide also giving this is the URL that you need to give here. Then sign on URL you can copy from here. You can see that there is a SSO sign in URL here. You can simply copy from here and paste it. So these are the basic first configuration that you need to complete. Once you complete that, you can see that the user attributes and claims. So these are the details that Microsoft agree with the Dropbox that we can share with the Dropbox. So if you think one of this is not acceptable for your organization to share, then you can simply click on the edit button. Then you can delete from any of this place. So this is about the user attributes and claims. Then SAML sign-in certificate. So you need to download this certificate and upload it into the Dropbox console, because the SAML assertions that sent by your Azure AD identity provider to the service provider Dropbox is signed using the private key of Azure AD. So you need to provide this certificate to Dropbox so that Dropbox can verify it. So that is what you can see here, X.509 certificate. This certificate is what I downloaded from here and uploaded to Dropbox console. Then after that, you're done with the minimum configurations, and you can see there is a identity provider sign in URL and identity provider sign out URL. This you can copy from here. So you can copy from here, and you can see that setup Dropbox business. So instead of doing all these manually, you still have the ability to click here and complete the configuration by simply providing the providing the admin credentials of the Dropbox. So doing this manually will help you to understand what are the process involved, and if just clicking here will complete everything automatically. So once you are done with this, then you want to test actually the configuration, right? So this can be done using, a moment please. Yeah, we are back. We can test using this test single sign-on with the Dropbox business. So in order to test, you can click on the text option. Then from here, you have two options. You can sign in as current user, or you can sign in as someone else. Let's click on sign in as someone else. Then, sorry. So you can see that it completed the verification, and you can see what are the informations that shared between the identity provider and service provider. So this is the unique identifier that Dropbox use. So if you look at here, we have claims, given name, surname, email address, name, unique user identifier, but Dropbox is going to use only the email address. So if you want, you can remove the other things. Then you can see the token claims included. What are the things included in the token claims, and also which certificate it used to sign the token. So as we already shared the public part of the key, Dropbox can easily decrypt the token and see like what is inside. Now, if you want to see like the download, if you want to see the SAML request and SAML response, you can simply download it. and open it here. So that will help you to see the this response and the request sent. So this is the request sent by Dropbox in this test access. Then you can see it included which URL it want the response. Then also it included the issuer name. So this is how Azure AD identify who is requesting. Then you can see in the format it requests for the email address. So identity provider provide email address as in the response. So let's have a look at the response also. So you can see that the status success, which means the authentication was successful, and this is the destination URL. Then coming down, you can see that the certificate, the signature value, and also this is the claim that's sent by an identity provider to the service provider, that is here Dropbox. Then you can see other informations also included here. So this is how you can test your access to Dropbox. So as I show you, like in the step-by-step guide, we have a lot of options Microsoft already integrated. So we completed assign users and groups, and also we completed set up single sign-on. Now, if you want to provision the users automatically, in this case, you can simply go and click here. Then you can see I already provision some users automatically. So what you can do, you can click on the edit provisioning option. The provisioning mode is automatic now. By default, it will be in manual. But what you have to do, you can come here and you can authorize the Dropbox Business API here. Then once you authorization means you enter only the administrator username and password, then you can complete the authorization. So once you done with this authorization, then from here onwards, you can simply provision the users automatically. So it means that once you add a user to the first step, the user automatically get access to Dropbox. You don't need to go to the Dropbox and do that. So you can see now I have 3 users provisioned. It was 2 users in the beginning. Let's go and click on the logs, and that will display more information about this. Let's make it 1 month. So now you can see that the users automatically created using the automatic provision. So this is how you can utilize the enterprise application, Azure AD gallery application features once you have when you want to configure single sign-on. Going back to Dropbox. All right. So we saw about assign users and groups. We completed the single sign-on setup, and we completed the provisioning of user accounts. After that, you have conditional access option. In this conditional access option, you can customize the access policy, and also you can provide self-service where the users can request access to the application. So these are the additional choices you have in this Dropbox business with enterprise application. And based upon the application, you will have more or less choices here, and that can be utilized to automate a lot of things in addition to setting up the single sign-on. So that's it. That's all about the demo.
Okay, thanks, Nias. That's excellent session. I hope it was helpful. Well, this is on the company, my company page. That we are still offering the discount for anyone who is in the US willing to buy some new Office licenses and move on. And please use the discount code and reach out to Sales ID and mention their sales at goldenfly.net, and you can get going with this. Yes, next screen.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so the
This is not right. Okay.
Okay, yes. So we're also offers Azure Virtual Desktop. Anyone who wants to use it, it's starting with $25. We can talk about it. Just email us at sales@golden5.net. Move on to the next. And if you would like to connect with us for more, here is the connections where you can reach out to us. You can see our YouTube channel. Yes, did you also add yours?
I give in the introduction actually, so I think it's okay.
And then we move to the next slide. Next slide is questions. We'll go back to the QA, and we'd like to thank everyone. I just flash the next slide, please. Thanks, everyone. Special thanks to Nias, who is dealing with COVID right now. He's in COVID, quarantining himself, and he said he wanted to continue the session. So I said, let's do it. I offered him that if he doesn't feel well, he can relax, but he wanted to do it, and you can see he's a fighter, and he's recovering from COVID as well. Let's go back to the session and see if there's any question. Well, I don't see any question right now.
Yeah.
This topic is very interesting, so I'm hoping, if not today, people will come back with some questions later. So we're hanging tight here, guys. So anyone has a question, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll have the answer. I think we can turn off the camera and just hang around here and see if anything comes up for next 18 minutes. And
Okay.
then we will be going. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a nice weekend ahead. We'll close now. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Prabhat, and thank you everyone for attending. Bye.